So we're going to begin chapter 17 and talk about blood. Now you might find it interesting that we have one chapter devoted to blood, but I think you'll find it really interesting that blood has so many functions, probably beyond many that you think of right away. So in this chapter, after you're done, you should be able to list the components of the cardiovascular system and describe the several important functions of blood, describe the important components and major properties of blood, and explain the origins and differentiation of the formed elements. The cardiovascular system consists of the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. And some textbooks put all these into one chapter, maybe two, and your textbook really does divide these out into three, and easily, I might say. So when we talk about the heart, which we will in a subsequent chapter, the importance of the heart is for pumping the blood and maintaining your blood pressure. Your blood vessels, which include the arteries, capillaries, and veins, are important for carrying blood. The arteries specifically for carrying blood away from the heart, and usually this is oxygenated. And then the capillaries permit the exchange between the blood and interstitial fluids of the different gases and the waste products and your nutrients. And then on the other side of the capillaries are the veins, which are kind of draining off the blood and carrying it back to the heart. And usually this is going to be your deoxygenated blood. So in a nutshell, the functions of your blood. So we transport dissolved gases, nutrients, but also hormones, which we talk about with the endocrine system, and metabolic wastes. Oxygen, in this case, is going from the lungs to the peripheral tissues. So we need your blood vessels for this. Carbon dioxide is going from your tissues to your lungs because carbon dioxide is a waste product given off from cellular respiration. Nutrients from your digestive tract or storage in adipose or liver being carried to other cells. Your hormones being produced by different glands, as we described when we talk about the endocrine system, to their target organs. And then, of course, transporting of wastes to your kidneys for excretion. In addition, the blood's going to be important for regulating pH and ion composition of your interstitial fluids. And these are the fluids that are in between your cells. So here we're going to absorb or neutralize the acids because most life processes operate within a really narrow range of pH. And we'll talk about that in a subsequent chapter as well. In addition, you've got diffusion between the blood and the interstitial fluid and balancing of ion concentrations there. Blood also is going to be important in its ability to restrict your fluid loss at injury sites. You have enzymes and other substances that initiate clotting when the vessel wall is broken. So a clot is a temporary patch. And later on in the chapters, we'll talk about 3 ways that we restrict fluid loss or blood loss. Also, blood is going to be responsible for defending against toxins and pathogens. So we transport white blood cells and antibodies to fight infection with your blood. We'll talk about this when we talk about the immune system in the lymphatic system chapter. And then this last one you may have not thought of, stabilization of body temperature. Your blood absorbs heat that's generated in one area and then distributes to other tissues. So if you have high body temperature, your blood is often going to be directed closer to your skin. Your vessels will dilate and you'll often see your skin get redder. On the other hand, if you have low body temperature, the blood is going to be directed more to the brain and to your vital internal organs. That's where you need the heat, and therefore the blood vessels may be more constricted at the skin surface and your skin might get lighter in color. So this diagram shows basically the summarization of those things that we just saw in those previous slides, the functions of the blood. So what is blood? Well, blood is a fluid connective tissue as we described in Anatomy and Physiology 1. And you'll recall that one thing that makes it a connective tissue is indeed it does connect the different tissues, but also because it has a matrix, in this case, a liquid matrix. And also the way blood is made is similar in some ways to how connective tissues are formed. Whole blood is blood with all the components, and this includes plasma, which is the liquid matrix, and the formed elements, which are the cells and the cell fragments. Now, in males, we usually see 5 to 6 liters of blood, and in females, 4 to 5 liters. Some of the properties of whole blood. Blood temperature is usually about 38 degrees Celsius or 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, a little bit higher than your core body temperature. Blood is also 5 times as viscous as water, so very resistant to flow. And it's because of the dissolved proteins and the formed elements in water molecules. Blood is also slightly alkaline. The pH is between 7.35 and 7.45, and you'll want to remember that. Now, of your blood, plasma is 55% of the volume. It's very similar to the interstitial fluid, has a constant exchange of water ions, small solutes across your capillary walls. But the main difference, the respiratory gases that you're going to find in the blood. You have oxygen, carbon dioxide, which you're not going to see in the interstitial fluid, and also the dissolved proteins. So plasma proteins cannot cross the capillary walls, so you're not going to see that in the interstitial fluid. The formed elements, which are the blood cells and fragments, compose about 45% of your whole blood. And of that, 99% of the formed elements are red blood cells. So it's pretty packed. And white blood cells really are few in number. Now, we can determine what a person's actual percentages are of the formed elements versus the plasma by doing a hematocrit. So we find the percentage of whole blood from the formed elements, and the overall average, again, about 45%. Males average 47, females about 42. So basically we put the blood in a tube and we spin it in a centrifuge. If we look at the plasma proteins in more detail, they are found in solution. Each 100 mils of blood has about 7.6 grams of protein. So that's a lot more than your interstitial fluid. They're large globular shapes, and this prevents them from leaving the bloodstream to get into the interstitial fluid. Your liver synthesizes more than 90% of the plasma proteins. And one thing I often point out as we go through different chapters is that the liver is responsible for many functions beyond which you might automatically think as well. Okay, of these proteins, albumins are about 60% of the plasma proteins, and their purpose is for osmotic pressure. We've got to maintain a particular concentration for purposes of exchange of fluids. Remember, we talked in A&P1 about hypertonicity and hypotonicity in maintaining certain amounts of fluid in cells versus the outside. The globulins are about 35% of the plasma proteins, and these include the antibodies, which we call immunoglobulins, which attack foreign proteins and pathogens, and the transport globulins, which bind ions, hormones, lipids, and other compounds. If you've worked in a clinical setting or read some clinical papers, you may have heard of antibodies responded to in a way that people often say are immunoglobulins, or often we say gamma globulin. Fibrinogen in particular is about 4% of plasma proteins. They're going to be important for blood clotting, and these form large insoluble fibrin strands when you have a clot. Plasma also has active and inactive enzymes and hormones. Plasma solutes. Keep in mind, water is about 92% of the plasma. So of the plasma solutes, the electrolytes, which are basically charged elements or compounds, are essential for your vital cellular activities. And we talked a lot about these in Anatomy and Physiology 1. Sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, hypochlorite, phosphate, sulfates. And then you have your organic nutrients like lipids, carbohydrates, and amino acids as plasma solutes. And these are going to be used for cell ATP production, growth, and maintenance. Organic wastes are also a part of your plasma solutes, and they're going to be carried to the sites of breakdown or excretion. For example, urea, uric acid, creatinine, bilirubin, ammonia. The platelets are a part of the formed elements, and they are less than 0.1% of those. There's small membrane-bound cell fragments involved in clotting, but as you very well know, they have a very important function. The white blood cells, also called leukocytes, they're less than 0.1% of the formed elements, but again, very important for body defense. There are 5 classes of the white blood cells that we will talk about later on, each with different functions, but as you can see in the picture to your right, you have the neutrophils and the eosinophils, the basophils, the lymphocytes, and the monocytes. Again, the majority of your formed elements are red blood cells, or called erythrocytes. 99.9% of your formed elements are red blood cells, and their main purpose is oxygen transport.